Good evening and welcome to the Varietal Show. My name is Rory and you're watching Varietal Literature's YouTube page where we mess around with stories and narrative and so on. On Tuesdays we read fairy tales and old folk tales, but today we create our own tales and our own settings, and we basically just go through techniques for writing and so on that I use for various things in my life, mainly because it's fun to write together, but also because it's occasionally helpful, but I wouldn't say that's necessarily always my goal. I see Big Drew's already in the chat, so if you haven't already and you're watching live, check out the chat. I guess it'd be that way for you guys. And he says, "Good evening, Lit Games," in a Robin Williams voice, of course, which is Big Drew's way of saying good evening. So what are we doing tonight? I am going to show you, I had a conversation this week with somebody about how do I create a fictional town that feels lived in. Now, this is a really specific thing, so I sort of went back and forth as to like, is this suitable for the Varietal Show? And I think it still is. But obviously, this is definitely getting more nitty gritty than I normally do. Normally we try to do some more silly and open stuff, but that is the nature of it. And what I'm going to do is I'll just show you kind of now really quick. I'm going to show you 3 steps to making a town feel lived in, at least in my experience. Now, primarily I do this for D&D, but I also do this for writing books sometimes, or stories anyways. So the first is you need to figure out the town's premise, which is like a character premise. So we'll come back to that later. Second, you need to figure out the town's schedule. Now, I think that's probably the most interesting observation that I've made that I don't see a lot of people make about towns. So we'll come back to that. And then the third thing is we're going to talk about the town's various trade representatives. Now, that's not like an official title. I mean, they represent a work type in the town for the reader or the player. So we're going to do that. Now, if you don't want to like deal with a lot of chatting with chat and all of that, if you just want to know, hey, what's the idea? And you want to be able to jump ahead and you're not watching live, I know that's a lot of conditions. Down in the description below, there will be timestamps to jump you ahead to various things that we work on. Our goal today is basically to come up with one shop in a town. So we'll see if we'll be able to do that. But that's what we're doing tonight. Hopefully that's of interest to whoever it is out there watching in the watching lands. I see GS is in the chat. It says, "Good evening. I'm late because I had a power outage." Oh no, but it magically came back on in time. I bet that's just everybody using their air conditioning. My lord, it's going to be a weird night of writing if I can't pull air conditioning to mind. Okay, so, well, we may as well transfer over. I mean, why am I blabbity blib blabbly blue when we can get right into it? I did drink a lot of coffee today. I had one of those like super coffee highs, and I crashed hard. I feel like I'm kind of leveled out and slightly with a migraine at this point. But that's what you get for having a lot of coffee. It is Lit Games. Lit Games is the part of the show, the main part of the show on Varietal Show, where we have fun with literature. It's literature games. We go and write stories. And what we're doing tonight is we are going to... There we go. We are going to go through 3 steps to a town, to creating a lived in town. Okay, so the town's premise, the town's schedule, and the town's trades representatives. So let me just very briefly describe these. The town's premise is probably the easiest thing and the thing that you would think of. In literature, a town needs to have like a character the way that everything else does. Now you might say, well, towns and cities are really multifaceted. How am I supposed to reduce that down to a main feature or idea or whatever, or feeling or mood? The same way you do it with characters, because characters in books are nowhere near as multifaceted as a real human being is. You kind of distill to the only things that really matter for the reader, and that creates a very, kind of a caricature. There's always a little bit of caricature in art. And that's kind of what a town's premise is. So, like, you might have a town that is relatively close-knit and cheerful, and so, like, the community is the main premise of it. Or you might have a town that's really heavy into industry, right? These are sort of cliches, but that's what I mean by a town's premise. Something that is like a few words about that town that comes through and everything that the reader or the player can hook into their memory, right? So, well, think about that, whether it's like it can be as simple as like a fishing town that's sort of broken down, or a really high-end tech town. There's lots of things you can do. Now, the town's schedule, the second step, is once you know the premise, you think about how does a day operate for this town? And this part, I think, is best explained in terms of modern society, like just today. So today, our towns that we live in, tends to have a kind of general chunked out schedule. For example, deliveries go out from like 5 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. for grocery stores and whatever, because they want to skip the next chunk of the schedule, which is rush hour and getting kids to school. And then there's lunch hour. And then there's, like this afternoon where kids start getting off school. And then there's everybody leaving the office. And then finally there's like dinner time and evening where people are mostly at home. And depending on the city and its size, there might even be stuff going on in the middle of the night. And so basically when I say town schedule, I mean the world kind of operates on these little TikTok cogs of time and interconnection. And at any given point, if somebody in your story or in your game is in that town at 7 a.m., you would know what you need to be describing, because you would understand how that schedule of that town plays out, how its industry is laid out. The last one, the town's trades representative, is a simple concept that comes up all the time in writing. I cannot introduce you to like the full staff of a work crew. Let's say it's a janitorial staff, or let's say it's a construction crew, if they're just side characters. It's a lot to put, like, to have like 7 named people that never come up again. Instead, what you do is you have the janitor. Like, how in high school films and stuff, there's always a person, there's always a janitor, right? Like The Simpsons, it's Willie, and I can't think of anybody else's name, but I can think of a whole bunch of shows where that's the case. If you didn't know, there isn't a janitor. Nearly every high school, except the absolute smallest, has teams of them, right? Of course they do. There's a lot to do, and there's stuff to do at different shifts in the day. But we do that in writing so that you don't have to learn like the 5 different shifts of janitors. You just learn that one person, and what's going on in the janitorial world gets channeled through that one character. So, let me let's get a sense of where people are at. Let's start with number 1, the town's premise. Because obviously just doing is the best way of doing stuff. Could use some language there. Okay, I see there's already some writing going on. Big Drew says, the sidewalk sparkled as if sprinkled with glitter as we strolled down the boulevard in Crosland. Crosland was an old town, but you wouldn't know it for how well it was kept. Okay, so a vintage town. The townsfolk mowed their lawns every day. Every Tuesday evening at 6, a hush would fall over the town each night promptly at 8:30, when all cars were neatly tucked in the garages and the lights came on. Absolutely. GSS trade representative Heaven. Okay, we'll work that in. The sirens start at 11 p.m. Crosland, at its inception, was a city on industry, one where timber and steel ran everything. Trucks would roar each morning at 7 and fall silent at 3:30 in the afternoon. Local school here has 2 janitors who stand out front at noon and smoke. Yeah. GS says, loving your town, Drew. The town's industry has long since faded, but the wealth built there never left. See, this is excellent, Big Drew. And I think this is why... Now, the reason why I emphasize lived in is usually when I see people talk about building a town, they get really fixated on the history, which I think is fine, as long as you understand that that history only matters insofar as it will make an appearance in the story or to the player or the reader. Otherwise, the thing you're trying to build is a setting, not a history, right? Like, history is only valuable if it informs how the buildings look, right? Or who lives there. Beyond that, it just kind of becomes wanking, frankly. Like, I mean, that's why I'm a little cautious of lore sometimes, despite being a guy who writes a lot of lore and genre stuff. You know, you got to be careful because ultimately it doesn't matter the backstory on everything. What matters is how that backstory plays into the visuals. And to take Big Drew as an example, because he's doing an excellent job here, he's talking about, you know, the fact that there's these trucks that would work on the industry of timber and steel. Well, if we know that timber and steel were there, let's say later I'm trying to put together, you know, some hipster restaurant in this now high-end non-industry town. Well, they're going to be in a former wood mill or something that was hollowed out and is now a craft brewery. Like, those details might come out and add depth to the page. Now, why does that matter? Well, I guess we'll see as we go along. It's enough talking for me. Let me have a drink of water. Let's figure out a town's premise. Premise sometimes comes later, but as it's like core character, let's say a hipster, we'll go with Drew's, a hipster town that was once blue collar. Okay. So let's talk about its schedule now. And like, you know, just as a rough estimate, let's start from like 5 a.m. because that's about the earliest anybody gets up. In an average town these days, 5 to 8 a.m., let's say 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. I'm doing this pretty roughly, and I'm not going to cover all times because I don't care that deeply that all times are covered. I do care that we have a sense of what goes on in a day. So 2:30 to, let's say, 4. It's weird for me. I usually use the 24-hour clock, but I think if I do that here, I'll lose the crowd. 4 p.m. and let's say 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. and then 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Okay. Big Drew says, hey Rory, is it possible to view the chat in the rebroadcast? It is. If you go back and you watch it right away, it's usually not processed. It usually takes about 24 hours for YouTube to have everything worked. But if you do go back and watch it a couple of days later, when you click on the little live chat thing under the video, it will replay the chat. If it's not doing that, I mean, I can double check the settings. I'm not going to do that right now, but remind me later. Because it is a thing I can set up. It is supposed to be on. And when I have checked other videos, at least they have been able to replay it. You do have to click it to get it to replay. Okay, so a hipster town that was once blue collar. So, Drew, in this town of, sorry, what was it called? Crosland. In this town of Crosland. what goes on at 5 to 8 a.m. Now, you mentioned what used to go on, which is the trucks used to drive around, and that's cool. But we want to figure out what the setting is for it right now. So from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. in a hipster town, I'm going to say the joggers are moving Joggers are jogging towards the speckled, the coffee shops speckled through town. Most doing a few kilometers. And spending twice the time sipping creamy coffees. Oh, Gia says lots of cyclists. That's true. The joggers are jogging. And the cyclists... Come on. Are cycling towards the coffee shops speckled through town. Most doing a few kilometers, then spending twice the time sipping creamy coffees. What else goes on at 5 to 8 a.m. in Crosland? I guess deliveries? I guess Amazon deliveries, right? Like that would be the big thing. Gig workers and part-time Amazon drivers drop tchotchkes? Is that? Hey, I'm trying to remember how you spell this. With a T? Tchotchkes, is that Yiddish? Or is that like German or something and I'm way off? I mean, Yiddish is... It spells it that way? Is that right? Is there a T at the beginning? Was I that far off? Gig workers and part-time Amazon drivers drop tchotchkes in oversized boxes. Tchotchkes and beard combs in oversized boxes. At the homes of programmers. JS confirms it is Yiddish. The sidewalks are empty, but for the flux of shivering commuters waiting for the first buses. Okay. Whether it's a murder mystery or a romance, if I decide now that I'm going to, you know, have my characters do something at 5 to 8 a.m., I now get a sense of what it looks like in Crosland during this time. Big Drew is continuing his lore here. The Connolly family, the oldest family in Crosland, held the deed for the largest lumber mill in town. Turned the mill into a newspaper press, one that was delivered to the community free of charge. James Connolly III was an educated man, an avid reader, and each morning at 5, he'd start the press to ensure that the papers were bound and ready for delivery by 7. Ooh. I do like that. Okay, so then we ask ourselves from 8 to 10 a.m., what else is going on in this city? Well, That's rush hour, I think. The morning rush was in full swing. Cars painted yeah, oh, what do they call those? Those car co-ops. I can't think of a name of one. Or you rent a car for like a couple hours. Cars painted in... screw it. If I can't remember it, it's not going to work. So, the morning rush was in full swing. Bikes crisscrossed the road en masse. The buses cut into thick, or into the inches between bumpers at long lights. In the rain, it's a chilly time. In the summer, it's a pleasant temperature. Shops open now, but only the breakfast places are really seeing crowds. The others are still setting the windows. Oh, Holly's house here is here. It says, we haven't covered my time yet. I'm 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. Okay, then we go to lunch hour. In this hipster town, what does lunch hour look like? People in printed, colored shirts. Clean, smart, but safely quirky. By local greens and vinaigrettes. Yeah, that's not right, is it? Yeah, that's right. There we go. Oh. By local greens and vinaigrettes at a price much greater than is reasonable. Not exactly original, but I guess it gets the job done. The taco shop in a place that only serves preparations of offal such as pork belly will have lineups. From their opening to their close at 2:30 p.m. those that work outdoors stick with sending the rookie for McDonald's. But get the better view down at the water's edge. Oh, I see the story continues with Big Drew, who says, Oren Steele, the cleverly named descendant of Tyrus Steele, was the ne'er-do-well heir to the Steele fortune. His lifestyle of excess would ensure that the family's wealth would never live past himself. Ooh. GS says lots of coffee shops and lattes, wraps to eat, indeed. Big Drew continues, the Steele and Connolly families had been at odds since the split of the Connolly Steel Foundry and Mill. The city of Crosland flourished despite the bad blood. Okay, so from 2:30 to 4:30, or to 4 p.m. What's going on in our town of Crosland? What happens from 2:30 to 4? I mean, obviously the school's let out. What does a school look like in a little hipster town like this? Well, a big hipster town. I mean, ultimately, I'm just describing Vancouver at this point. Because it's a hipster town that used to be industrial. 2:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. It's not rare to see some tired lady arguing on the phone while fumbling for keys. She's certain it wasn't her day to pick the kids up. But obviously, someone disagrees on the line. The garbage trucks are shifting into the last hard places to reach, trying to beat the afternoon rush and get every bin emptied that's in a narrow lot, a narrow alley connected to a main road. The schools are a mix of old mahogany buildings lined by narrow 1 or 2 lane roads. And modern structures to deal with the population bloat. You'll catch children playing tag between big white portables. Steel and glass boxes with pastel stucco. Mom or Dad, will be by soon. They're just grabbing some tortellini from the grocery store to beat the later crowds. Okay. Now I can go on. I'm not going to go on though because I feel like we get the point and we probably have enough to work with. So the idea here, the reason why I'm getting kind of descriptive, it's more important that we get a sense of like what it looks like during these times, partially because when you're writing it's nice to be able to just drag and drop stuff. Oh, I see Big Drew has done 5 to 7 for us, so why don't I just copy that? As they say, great artists steal. I have stolen from you. Whoops. It doesn't have to be as detailed and elaborate as what I'm doing here. You can do it pretty simply, to be honest. The main feature of it, the thing that you have to be cognizant of, is that the world looks like people are moving as if your main characters or your players don't matter. Because most people don't structure their life around the needs or wants of a narrative in some character in a story. So a part of making a place look lived in is it has to feel like it moves without them. Your world cannot simply be a place that is responsive to your protagonist. And so the way that you do that is you put your protagonist out of your thoughts. You don't try to write this stuff in the flow, because it's only going to be stuff that is needed and responsive to that protagonist or lead character. Instead, what you do is you sort of get a sense of what the place looks like first, and then you put your characters in it. And then as you need to, you mention what they see, and that helps portray to the reader that this is a person living in a world that is real. Okay, so that's the idea of the schedule and the premise. Now we need a trade representative. Well, we have a few things here. We have people that pick up garbage cans and so on. We have people that pick up work in offices of some sort. I mentioned programmers at one point. We have people that that deal with, I don't know why I'm having such a hard time pulling words out here. We have children in schools and whatever, which means we'll have teachers. So what we need to do is just pick a trade, and then the character who's going to represent that. So like out of those, chat, what are we interested in creating? Are we going to create a shopkeep who does like really pretentious coffee? Are we going to cover the guy who has to go and lift all the dumpsters with his big truck? Big Drew, that's right. GS gave a recommendation. Big Drew reminded me. Trade rep works at the pot shop. That's right. And there was a name for it. I got to scroll back up. Hemp Heaven. Okay, perfect. So I want you guys to think about, first of all, a name. Remember how names are always the hardest thing? Honestly, I could write 1,000 characters and come up with one name in the same amount of time. Hemp Heaven Sales Associate. Okay. Name. God, names. I'm just gonna make a new one. Just gonna use the generator. We're back to the name. Come on, names and naming. Quick character namer. You guys can't see this. Sorry. I'm assuming this is a man. It's usually how it goes. Okay, we got Brock Cohen, Bernie Peterson, Leung, Leonard Davenport. I like Leonard Davenport. Let's go with that. Okay. Big Drew's writing some satire. The children in school have no set teacher. They're huddled together before a screen and a revolving edutainer. GS recommended Craig. Big Drew said Steve. Sorry guys, I didn't see that in time because of the delay on the stream. But I'm settled into Leonard Lenny Davenport now. Lenny feels like a guy who I've known to... Here's my most prominent memory. I went to, this was sort of like when I graduated high school. I was hanging out at some friend's house. Well, he wasn't a friend, really. He was a friend of a friend. And they were smoking pot. I didn't smoke pot. They were smoking pot. And at some point, when you're chopping up pot, the little buds get around, right, on the table. And he sort of spilled some of the buds. And he licked his thumb. And he dabbed up these tiny little buds off the table for an hour. And when I was like, dude, what are you doing? He was like, those are good buds, man. It's like my favorite memory of somebody just being uselessly high. Big Drew says Leonard Davenport sounds too sophisticated. It's always a lowbrow name. I guess I kind of like that aspect of it. I like the idea that he's like the failure in a family. Big Drew's pushing for Steve and Bianca. Okay. So Lenny, what's the highlight about here? Go away highlights. How about that? There we go. So he's a sales associate. Now here's what I want. What does he need today? Now this is really specific and it doesn't have to be big, but I want to give you like the most important piece of advice if you're trying to put together like D&D, or you're trying to put together some kind of game, or you're trying to put together story. People you meet in the world are the star of their own story. They don't automatically care about your characters. And so what does he need today? Like, it can be things like, I got too many boxes in the back and he wants me to reorganize it. And what he needs today is like to get that done. It could be like what he needs today is a good, cool drink. It could be what does he need today? Like is he needs to know why the guy across the street doesn't have his business open. Like it's wherever their head is at that point. Big Drew says, here they're called bud tenders. Now that's true. What are you saying there? Who are interlopers? Do we have interlopers? I'm not sure what you mean, Drew. If you mean like lurkers in the background, yeah, I always have lurking viewers, and I welcome them as much as any other. Bud tender is true. You're right. I think that would be like his non-tax title. Like on taxes, I think he'd be a sales associate, but he'd be a bud tender. More grow lights, bulbs are out, Gia says. So, like, I don't want to overstate how important it is, because for the most part, just think about yourself. In your day-to-day life, you have things you need to get done, right? Like, you need to pick up kids or whatever else. Or, like, I spilled a drink on my laptop and I need to ship it through FedEx. And FedEx is only open when I'm at work. And I don't know when I'm supposed to go in there and get them to package it up. Like, that's an example of what it means to be the star of your own story. Your thoughts are there. And that's what we need. So if you just start a passive conversation with Lenny, what is Lenny going to complain about or worry about? Because it's easy to be like, well, he's in a pot shop and he's a pothead, so he'll talk about pot. And that's a fair bet, by the way, with pot. But the... you know, what do they need? So Gia says the bulbs are out. The more grow lights, the bulbs are out. So let's go with that. What does he need today? He needs longer lasting grow light bulbs. He keeps burning them out. Now he has a crop in the dark, close to budding, and he can't get any lights for at least 3 or 4 days. Victor says Leonard needs a couple of good stoner songs like Smoke Two Joints by Sublime or The Pot by Tool. I've listened to a lot of Tool. I don't think I've heard that one. I mean, obviously, I know Smoke Two Joints. I mean, Sublime was really popular when I was in high school, which was weird because I think the guy had died like 8 years before my high school. Victor says he needs a burrito. He's got the munchies. Like, I think that's a fair thing. If you wanted to write it that way, you could, Drew. I tend to, when I talk to people, they tend to complain to me, in my experience, not about the simple things, but about like, well, not about simple things like I'm hungry. They tend to talk to me about logistical problems in their life. Like, I can't get this done. So if it was about food, it would be like, man, I don't have any rice. I was going to make my burritos for lunch, and I realized last night I didn't have any rice, and I was too baked to go out and get it. And now I just got, like, meat and beans in a wrap, and, like, it's okay, but it wasn't very filling. Like you know, logistical problems like I need rice. Holly's House says, just making plowman's dinner. I've heard of that. What's a plowman's dinner? Victor says he needs Nanaimo bars. Okay. So, let's take a look at what we've created, and I'll sort of, I think we got enough time to put it to like a scene, to show how this stuff comes together in a scene. Okay, so just for now, reviewing what we have, our premise is a hipster town that was once blue collar, called Croslin. The joggers are jogging, and cyclists are cycling at around 5 to 8 a.m., There's some gig workers and Amazon drivers dropping stuff off. Around 8 to 10 a.m., there's a morning rush with mainly bikes mixing in with the buses, but there's still cars. It tends to be a pleasant temperature there in the summer. You mainly only see food places open that early. So you push into a little later in the day, that's when kind of like everything's running. You get these little little sort of hipster shops like taco places and places that do really specific things like pork belly. They get really popular, but other than that, most people just kind of go in Canada. It'd be like Tim Hortons, but I don't know what's Baskin Robbins or something in the States, or McDonald's. And then in the afternoon, you start to see the parents leaving early to pick up the kids, generally kind of working and having to get some time off work to do it. The buildings are this mixture of that old time architecture, but when they've put in new buildings, they went for the cheapest options, which are like portables and whatever else. And then around 5 to 7, you start to see people go home and watch Netflix, right? Now, what I want to know is, like, what would a conversation with Lenny be like at, let's say, 2:30 in the afternoon, right? So, let's say our character isn't buying pots. They're trying to find out, let's say it's a mystery. They're trying to find out they're trying to find out maybe something about a car accident that had happened there a couple of days ago in the morning. Maybe it's like a detective novel. So let's say it's 2:30 p.m. and we want to have a conversation with Lenny, the bud tender, about hit and run in front of the in front of his shop a few days past. A private investigator talks to Lenny the Bunded. Big Drew says, potheads don't worry much about logistics, man. Honestly, it depends on the pothead. Some people are absolutely useless, and some people are super industrious. For the record, I'm not speaking from experience. I'm just hungry. You haven't had a Nanaimo bar since I was in Canada? Do they not sell them other places? I thought it was generally pretty popular. But yeah, the Mexican food. You won't find good Mexican food anywhere in Canada, frankly. You know, actually, what you will never find here is even passably good barbecue. And, like, people have barbecues here, and mostly they're like, you know, the propane cooking meat thing outdoors. But, like, I've had Texas barbecue. We don't do anything like that. There's restaurants that claim it. They'll put prizes on the front door. They'll say, hey, come on in. This is Texas barbecue in Vancouver. And they lie. Trash food. Okay, so a private investigator talks to Lenny the bud tender about a hit and run in front of his shop a few days past. Okay, so private investigator comes in. Let's say his name is Steve, because that was a recommended name. Steve stubbed out his cigarette and swung open the hemp, what was it? The hemp heaven door. It was a small shop. It was a small shop lined with vials and little packs of herb and candies. A woman in the shop was speaking loudly on her phone. some argument was ensuing. And though it seemed she was losing, she clung to her bitterness. All right, fine. I'll pick him up then. But you're doing it every day next week. She shouted into her phone. Then hung it up and sighed. I decided shut it in her phone, then hung it up and sighed. I decided to wait till she cleared out. After a moment of staring at the ground, she looked over to the short-haired guy by the counter and said, "I'll have to come back then." Lenny nodded with a half smile and said, "No worries. The bud ain't going anywhere. It grows on trees." He chuckled at his own joke, but she was already out the door. Lenny caught my gaze and said, "Oh, hey, man. Didn't hear you come in." "What can I bring to you, my dude?" Here to ask about an issue that you might be privy to. I said, "Oh? What's that?" he asked. "Hey dude, you're not an inspector, are you? 'Cause I'm supposed to phone my boss when inspectors drop by. I can't access all the records." Big Drew says, our character is a detective investigating the murder of one of Lenny's customers. Lenny's wake and bake high is worn off and he's itching to re-up. Can't smoke at work. Not since the incident. Big Drew says, I need to bring my smoker up and cook for you Canadians. We have smokers. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just the qualities of meats aren't the right thing for barbecue, or whether we don't have the right kind of wood, or it's just everyone's an idiot. But the barbecue here is terrible. The incident was in no way related to the murder, but they are more so an argument that Lenny had with his boss, Darius. And this argument was little more than a very minor disagreement, but Darius was a petty, petty man. I'll integrate that. He keeps the key now. After... Well, it doesn't matter. No, No, Inspector. I'm a private investigator. A few mornings back, there was a hit and run out front here. I want to know what you saw. Oh man. I don't have time to be giving you a statement. Some dude hit some dude. And then the other one took off. Okay, I don't like cops, alright? Lenny answered. I don't like cops either. I said. I'm a PI. I don't know what that is. Lenny mumbled. Do you remember the color of the car? I asked Lenny. No, man. I couldn't even remember to hit order on my grow lights. And now they aren't gonna be here for like 3 days. I gotta go sort the back room. Shit, man. Just whatever. I told you what I knew. Lenny said, I knew Lenny wasn't being honest. Someone had got to him. He wouldn't look me in the eye. I decided it might be something about the location. So I decided to leave before the after-school crowd plugged up the streets. And I'd have to pay for another hour of parking. Big Drew says, Lenny was distracted by the smell of barbecue on the air. It reeked of propane and poor seasoning choices. Lenny was reminded that he was not in Kansas anymore. Okay. Now, I don't know if all of this makes sense to people or was even remotely useful, but what we did in the course of about an hour then was create a town pretty quickly that we can pretty much infinitely iterate on, so that it feels like you are a place where time moves around you. And so the way that I'm going to, do that was we had our town's premise, we had our town's schedule, and we had this town's trade representative, and then we created a little scene with that. And so I'm going to go through it all right now to see what we created, but I should say that there are a bunch of variants going on in the chat that if you're watching this back later, you should definitely go and check out, because Big Drew did a great job doing a slightly less Vancouver and a slightly more charming version of a city than mine. So the premise is it's a hipster town that was once blue collar called Croslin. And our schedule, we didn't do the whole schedule. We just kind of did what would matter to us. 5 to 8 a.m., the joggers are jogging and the cyclists are cycling towards the coffee shops speckled through town, most doing a few kilometers, then spending twice the time sipping creamy coffees. Gig workers and part-time Amazon drivers drop tchotchkes and beard combs in oversized boxes at the homes of programmers. The sidewalks are empty, but for the flock of shivering commuters waiting for the first buses. So from 5 to 8 a.m., if our characters were in that scene, they would be seeing things like that. From 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., the morning rush was in full swing. Bikes crisscrossed the road en masse. The buses cut into the inches between bumpers at long lights. In the rain, it's a chilly time. In the summer, it's a pleasant temperature. Shops open now, but only the breakfast places are really seeing crowds. The others are still setting the windows with the day's deals. From 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., sort of lunch hour, we see people in printed collared shirts. Clean, smart, but safely quirky. Buying local greens and vinaigrettes at a price much greater than is reasonable. How about is much above market value? The taco shop in a place that only serves preparations of offal, such as pork belly, will have lineups from their opening to their close at 2:30 p.m. Those that work outdoors stick with sending the rookie for McDonald's, but get the better view down at the water's edge. It's not rare to see some tired lady, this from 2:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. It's not rare to see some tired lady arguing on the phone while fumbling for keys. She's certain that it wasn't her day to pick up the kids, but obviously someone disagrees. The garbage trucks are shifting into the last hard places to reach, trying to beat the afternoon rush and get every bin emptied that's in a narrow alley connected to a main road. The schools are a mix of old mahogany buildings lined by narrow 1 or 2 lane roads and modern structures to deal with the population bloat. You'll catch children playing tag between big white portables and steel and glass boxes with pastel stucco. Mom or Dad will be by soon. They are just grabbing some tortellini from the grocery store to beat the later crowds. And then finally, 5 to 7 p.m. was the last period of time we wrote about. Traffic, restaurants, and stores full of people. The sounds, this is from Big Drew, the sound of chewing soars louder than the idling motors of cars at rush hour. And so then we came up with this sales associate, or bud tender, who worked at a place called Hemp Heaven, a dispensary of marijuana. And his name was Leonard Lenny Davenport. And we did kind of have this headcanon going that he was from some rich family, but he was the burnout. And we established what that character needed that day, or was thinking about that day. And what it was he needs longer lasting grow light bulbs. He keeps burning them out. And now he has a crop in the dark, close to budding, and he can't get lights for at least 3 or 4 days. And so what we did was we used that information to pick sort of a time and place and have a little conversation of a story that just doesn't otherwise exist. So it's a private investigator talking to Lenny the bud tender about a hit and run in front of his shop a few days past. Steve, our private investigator, stubbed out his cigarette and swung open the hemp heaven door. I think I switched from third to first. It was a small shop lined with vials and little packs of herbs and candy. A woman in the shop was speaking loudly on her phone. Some argument was ensuing, and though it seemed she was losing, she clung to her bitterness. All right, fine. I'll pick him up then, though I'm already going to be late. But you're doing it every day next week, she shouted into her phone, then hung it up and sighed. I decided to wait until she cleared out. After a moment of staring at the ground, she looked over to the short-haired guy by the counter and said, "I'll have to come back then, Lenny." Lenny nodded with a half-smile and said, "No worries, the bud ain't going anywhere. It grows on trees." He chuckled at his own joke, but she was already out the door. Lenny caught my gaze and said, "Oh, hey man, didn't hear you come in. What can I bring to you, my dude?" I'm here to ask you about an issue that you might be privy to," I said. "Oh, what's that?" he asked. "Hey dude, you're not an inspector, are you? 'Cause I gotta phone my boss when inspectors drop by. I can't access all the records. He keeps the key now after... Well, it doesn't matter. No, I'm no inspector. I'm a private investigator. A few mornings back, there was a hit and run out front here. I want to know what you saw." "Oh man, I don't have time to be giving you a statement. Some dude hit some dude, and then the other one took off. Look, I don't like cops, alright?" Lenny answered. "I don't like cops either," I said. "I'm a PI. "I don't know what that is," Lenny mumbled. "Do you remember the color of the car?" I asked Lenny. "No, man. I couldn't even remember to hit order on my grow lights. Now they aren't going to be here for like 3 days. I got to go sort the back room. Shit, man. Just whatever. I told you what I knew," Lenny said. I knew Lenny wasn't being honest. Someone had got to him. He wouldn't look me in the eye. I decided it might be something about the location, so I left before... the after-school crowd plugged up the streets. And I'd be forced, let's say, to pay for another hour of parking. And so that's just to show that, like, it's not prominent, really. But, like, the fact that the city occurs around them in, the sequence of time, it collects over scenes to give you a sense that you're in a city and it operates a certain way. Now this gives you ideas for events in a story. Big Drew says, "I haven't been paying attention. Can you run through this whole thing again with new writing examples and literary tools employed?" Absolutely. I'll tell you what I'll do, Drew. I'm going to stop this stream, but when it's stopped, I'm going to put up another one in its place. It's going to look real similar, but you just stick with it. It'll change. Just hit the restart. Watch it all the way through again. You'll see. There'll be new stuff for you. It's a pre-recorded one I had in case this one didn't work out. And you're welcome ahead of time. The GS says, "Every class I've ever taken, always one who wasn't paying attention wants it repeated." Big Drew says, mine had a big dark twist coming. I've been binge watching all of Stranger Things over the last couple of days. The Duffer Brothers are awesome writers and a bit twisted. I watched the first season of Stranger Things and I enjoyed it, but for some reason, it never drew me that much in. And it's weird because I don't really have any specific complaints. I think I had a problem with the end of the first season. I think I felt like there was... I'm trying to remember what it was. It's been a while since I've watched it. Oh, I remember. The cop. The character of the cop did things that made so little sense that it actually started to bug me. And I'm pretty forgiving about that. Not that they didn't make sense for the plot. Didn't make sense for him as a character to that point. Which is okay. I mean, it's an 80s sort of fun X-Files-esque kind of show. But I never really watched it after that. But I know everybody's been watching it and I'm starting to feel like I'm missing out. GS says, "I've been watching Netflix all the Harlan Coben thrillers. The Stranger and Stay Close." GS says, "Rory, I want to read your book," and Big Drew, "I want to read your book." I have finished my second pass of my first season of that thing that I'm releasing. What I'm doing right now, actually, is I'm drawing some art for it. But And I also have to send it off to an editor. So I suspect that even though I said this in April and it didn't happen, I suspect that this month we should start seeing the first parts of it. I think for now the working title is The Sword in Ursa Hill. And it's about a brother and a sister who need to defend the hilt of a very large sword that is stabbed in the back of a hill shaped like a giant bear. And yeah, that's all I'll say about that for now. I'll say more about it once I have it up on the site. Anyways, for those who stuck around the whole time, thank you so much for coming by. I know we went a little long tonight. We went a little long on Tuesday. Why am I going long? It's the middle of summer. It's super hot. I should be doing the short episodes. Thank you so much for coming by and dropping ideas, GS. And Big Drew, I really, as always, really enjoy your contributions and your very creative way of looking at things. And I hope to see you guys all back next week. This is the Varietal Show. Thank you very much for coming by, all you lurkers in the background. But I gotta go cash out. Get out of my shop.